So finally, I have some seedlings that are ready to be planted out in the veg garden, which is really exciting. I just wanted to share with you how and why I've chosen the methods that I've chosen this year. They are different to how I've planted my seedlings before. And I'm hoping by the end of this video, you'll know how I select the seedlings that are ready to be planted out, how I know they're ready, how I plant them in the ground and space them out. And then finally, how I plan to look after them moving forwards. So before we go into the garden and have a look at how we're going to plant our seedlings, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context around why I've chosen this method. So my long-term goal, or one of my long-term goals, I've got a few, but one of them is to adopt more of a permaculture approach across the whole of my garden. I'm not going to go into details as to what that is. I'm by no means an expert in it. You can look at Hugh Richards' YouTube channel or this book, which I've got of his, which has proven really interesting. But this is a long-term goal, and essentially it's about working with nature rather than against nature and looking at your garden as a whole. So every function, every part of your garden, using it to its full potential. But with that in mind, one of my short-term goals, which hopefully I will be able to achieve this year, is instead of planting in rows and having one crop per bed, which is what I've done before, with no flowers, no herbs, nothing else, just that individual crop, I am going to go for a more diverse approach, which they call a polyculture, meaning I'm just going to basically pack a lot of variety into my veg beds. I'm going to have herbs, I'm going to have flowers, and I'm going to have vegetables as well. And the idea being, mixture of plants will attract all the good insects and the pollinators to my garden, but also help confuse and hopefully deter, in some instances, pests. I know it's not going to solve all pest issues, but hopefully it will minimize it. And as my aim is to try and grow dinner and grow as much food as I can and maximize my harvests, I know from previous experience that pests are just the worst thing. And I have actually given up many seasons growing just because the pests have taken over, basically, and particularly slugs. Let's go and look at how we choose our seedlings. So how do I choose which seedlings are ready to plant out? Well, the first thing that I do, and I think most gardeners would suggest you do, is check your last frost date for your local area. So if you just Google your town, it will tell you when your last frost date is. So for me, my last hard frost date is around the 1st of April, but I could have a frost between now right up to the 19th of April, but it would probably be a light frost. So anything that I choose would need to fall into that category that can tolerate a light frost. So immediately that eradicates things like your heat-loving crops, like your chilies, tomatoes and peppers. So the next thing that I'm looking for then is the size and how sturdy things are and how many true leaves they've got. So lettuce isn't a great example for that, but this spinach is a good example. So when your seed germinates, it will produce these little leaves here called seed leaves, and then as it continues to grow from those seed leaves, you'll get the real true leaves. So this spinach, no sorry, this is chard, this has got 2 sets of true leaves, so we've got 4 true leaves there, and you're looking for a plant that's got at least 2 and maybe up to 4. So because these crops that I've chosen can all tolerate a light frost, I'm happy with them having a set of true leaves, but I'm looking more for sort of 4 and up. The other thing I'm looking for is, and I think I can show you with one of these, is the root system. Now these lettuces have definitely been in the pot for too long. I was away last week, they probably should have gone out last week, but they're doing fine. They've got a really good root system. It's really packed. So I'm really happy with that. That's a really good indicator that it's ready to go out, and it's obviously got a lot of leaves. So my lettuce can go out. It's also lightly frost tolerant as well. We've checked for seed leaves. We've checked that they're frost tolerant. We've checked the root system. So here are some things that are probably not ready to go out yet. The basil is probably my best example. Most things are pretty close to being ready. But as you can see here, we have our seed leaves here on the sides, and we also have a set of true leaves, and they are all the same. I think I'm just having a little look. Yeah, these are not ready to go out, and because they're so small and they only have 1 set of true leaves. But also I like to do a little check underneath and normally you can see some roots. So this one I can see some roots, a couple of white shoots there, but they're certainly not packed in there. There's not an abundance of roots coming out. The other one is the rocket, so a bit bigger, a little bit more to it than the basil, and it's definitely got more than one set of true leaves, but they are a bit small, so the seed tray is not very deep, and I personally would be really worried that slugs would come along and get those. So I'm just going to wait a little bit longer until they are a little bit tougher. They also haven't been sitting outside in the fresh air. They've been here in the greenhouse. Another couple of good examples, like here, for example, these are marigolds, and these clearly are just nowhere near ready. They do actually have a set of true leaves developing, but they're not of any substantial size. We've got some that are coming along. These two here are quite good. Still not happy with the size of those yet. So yeah, these are actually ready probably to come out and have their own pots, but they're certainly not ready to be planted out yet. And these are not particularly tolerant of frost. I think they'll be fine in my garden at the moment because the 10-day forecast doesn't have any temperatures below 0. So I think they would be fine. Same with the celeriac. We've got the seed leaves down at the bottom there, and we've got a set of two there and then one here. For me, they look quite vulnerable, and as someone that's terrified of slugs, that would be too risky for me. Maybe not for other gardeners, but definitely too risky for me. Okay, so the other thing that you need to do before you put your seedlings out is you do need to harden them off to the outside temperatures. So depending on where you've had your seedlings, will depend really on how long you need to keep them outside for. So for me, my seedlings start off inside, they then go into the porch, and they then go into the greenhouse, and then once they're in the greenhouse, I then start bringing them outside onto that table. So for me, the process is kind of a continuous process. But if you've had your seedlings inside since the day they were germinated, you really do need to spend, I would say, 7 to 10 days having them outside, and I would do that progressively. So for the first couple of days they go out for a few hours, and I would just check the weather as well to see what weather they're going to get. They can have some rain, but I possibly wouldn't put them out for their very first time outside in torrential downpour. So gradually increase the amount of time that they're outside over a period of 7 to 10 days. So one thing I like to do first before I start planting is I like to water the bed and give the bed a good soak so that the soil is nice and saturated. The seedlings have all been watered last night, so I'm not going to water those, but I would like them to go into wet soil. So the second thing after the beds are watered you need to consider is the path that the sun takes in your veg garden. So for me, it's coming up behind, it comes up here, which is the east. We're kind of on an angle here, southeast, and then this bed, it gets the sun around 8:30. I think we're around 10, half 9, 10. And that bed over there, the in-ground bed, does not get any sun yet, but it does get sun until about 5 p.m. Before I start planting, I'm thinking about which crops need to sit where in the bed in terms of how much they love the sun or the shade. So think of it as layers. So you want your tall crops to be either in the middle or at the back, in my case at the back of my beds, so they don't cast shade on anything in front of them. So they'll be at the north end of the bed. This is the south end here, nearest me. For example, in this bed with all the canes around it, I've put my pea trellis here at the back. That's where they're going to get a decent amount of sun, but also they won't cast any shade on anything else. So anything that's planted in the west side of the bed here, as it grows and gets taller, it's going to cast shade onto anything on the east side of the bed. So just have a think about what crops you've got to plant, not just right now, but what crops you've got coming up, and make sure you save the sunniest spots for those heat-loving crops. And then the crops that can tolerate shade, things like lettuce and spinach and chard, carrots can tolerate some shade. They can go on the shadiest part of your beds. Okay, because I have chosen to go for that kind of polyculture approach with a mixture of plants and vegetables in each bed, to me although that sounds like it'd be really pretty and really beautiful to look at, and I'm really looking forward to doing it, the structured part of my brain did struggle with that a little bit. So I'd heard about square foot gardening a lot, and I know it's recommended for beginner gardeners, but I'd never really used it. However, I think it could potentially really help me out while I'm trying to establish this polyculture. So I made myself a square foot template. I have been researching how many of each type of plant I can grow in a square foot. So these beds are 3 foot wide by 5 foot long. They are rounded on the corners, so I do lose a little bit there, but that's fine. And although I'm not going to stick rigidly necessarily to the recommendations, in some instances I've already thought about it and I'm going to plant less than they suggest. In other instances I'm going to plant slightly more. But it does give me a guide, particularly as I'm going to have a mixture. Whereas before, I would have just taken these onions out and put them in rows all the way along. But if I'm going to have a square foot of onions and a square foot of lettuce and then a square foot of spinach, that's going to be a different quantity of each plant. So this square foot just takes the thinking away for me a little bit. If you Google it and go to images, you will see there's all sorts of different quantities that they suggest for each crop. But just use your common sense, particularly with things like onions. Think about how big you want your onion to be. They recommend nine onions per square foot, which I think works about right. And as they're a crop that you can kind of bunch together because they kind of push each other out the way, 9 seems about right to me. If I think about it, when they're fully grown, that's going to be, roughly how big I want my onion. If you want onions to be much bigger than that, then plant less per square foot. So for some things it's really obvious. Other things you might have to think about, like kale is going to be 1 per square foot because it gets quite big. So I'm going to try and have my herbs on the corners where I can. I will dot them in and out as well, but I definitely want those, a basil in one corner, maybe oregano in another corner, and then some cosmos and some nasturtiums, etc. So hopefully you saw that nice and clearly. Basically, I dug a hole the same depth as the pot that the seedling was in. Then I gave it a little handful of worm castings and then a very small handful of compost. That was just to save me money so that I didn't have to spread compost over the whole bed. I've just put a little bit in each planting hole so that the roots are getting everything they need. And then I just covered it back over. And where I've got strulch on this bed, I've tried to put the strulch back around it. And then I use this little space just here to sow. I think it's probably, I don't know, there are maybe 6 or 7 holes, and then I put 3 seeds roughly in each hole. That's the first section of square foot gardening done. There is some garlic in here, so with the chard and the kale, I did kind of a staggered planting so that the spacing worked, because I had that space between 2 garlic. So basically it's 4 chard per square foot, and then with the dwarf kale it recommended 2 kale per square foot. But yeah, that's 1 row of square foot planting done. So on this side here, I want to do a square foot of carrots. I know I've got the kale in the way, but that's fine. So I'm probably just going to work around the kale, leaving some space there. But first I'm just going to clear the strulch away. And I think I'm going to do 3 rows. So I'm just going to make a little channel, oopsie, with my finger. And then here I'm going to leave a little space so I'll start slightly away from the kale, just to give any carrots a fighting chance, and we'll go just like this. So a shorter row here. Again, this is all a bit experimental. We'll see what works and what doesn't. So I'm going to do some autumn king carrots in here. Now, these are the ones where I was concerned that they may not like these beds, or carrots in general actually just may not like these beds, because carrots don't like manure, and these beds have got manure in them. However, the manure is well rotted. It's very well decomposed. It's not fresh manure. I bought it in bags, and so I'm hoping that it will be okay, but we will find out. So this is Autumn King, and it's good for storage over winter. So there's not loads of these, so I'm going to be quite careful about how I space them. Normally I would sow them quite thickly, I suppose. As I don't have a lot of the seed, I'm going to try and be a little bit more precise. It's still relatively thick, but just not as much as perhaps I would normally. You just want to try and space them out as best you can, but the seed is tiny and you will end up with little clumps no matter how accurate you are. They're just hard to control. And these carrots are larger in size compared to the Nantes variety that I have. The Nantes are quite short, great sort of smallish carrot, but the Autumn King are a bigger variety. So yeah, I've never grown them before. This will be interesting. So once they start to shoot, I'll probably start thinning them then. Again, a bit like with the onions, you just thin them to about the sort of spacing that you'd expect an onion to develop. So whatever size you want your carrots, you just kind of just eyeball it and then thin or cut. I tend to cut the seedlings in between. If you pull them, you can run the risk of pulling out its friend next to him. And then you just pull the soil back over. Now I am going to water that little patch, and then I'll pop the strulch back over. Okay, the next section, or the next square foot, I want to try some onion seedlings in there, and then next to it I'm going to do radish. So I'm going to have the radish here. I'm going to do, I think, 3 onions in each row. So I'll end up with 9 in a set, which I think is probably about right. Like I was saying before, if you think about the size of the bulb that you want. And I'm just packing them into just like about where the bulb is about to form like they were basically in here. If you can see, yeah, I want them sitting just like they would have been in the pot. Okay, that is a square foot of onions. So we've got 9 onions, and we'll see how they do. So it's good, it's coming along. Carrots, onions, and then this square foot is going to be radish. Yeah, so I'm just going to go around and make a load of holes. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to do 1, 2, 4 rows. Okay, and it's more French breakfast. So everything's had a good water, and now once everything's planted, what I'm doing is, I think I've said before, mulch is new to me, but so far I'm really loving how it keeps the soil nice, not only obviously covered from the elements, but it's definitely keeping in the moisture. I've spread mulch over this whole bed. You don't have to use mulch. You can use, obviously, compost is something you could use. There's lots of things. There's grass clippings, sorry. Anything that basically covers the soil that's natural. We will see as the season goes on. It's also meant to have some slug deterring properties, but we will see. So here we are. One whole bed has been planted using the square foot sort of spacing method, trying to create this polyculture. I've got a couple of spaces for flowers, so I've got a calendula in that corner. I'm going to pop something else in that corner, but they're not quite ready yet. But yeah, now moving forwards, what you need to do is basically just create some kind of routine. That means you come out here every day and check your plants, check for pests, and then also just get your finger in the soil. If you've got some kind of mulch on top, then just move the mulch away and look to see what the moisture situation is like. Now this section here was quite well watered yesterday, but it has still been well protected by the mulch, and we've had a couple of hot days. So from now moving forwards, it's just about being observant, keeping your plants the least stressed as you possibly can. And then there's one last thing just to add. Obviously I've got 4 of these raised beds and they're all going to be full at some point, but the only way they're going to be full is if I keep on top of my sowing. So I've got a monthly planting or sowing list. I'm about to do my April sowings, and there'll be more of the same, so more lettuces, more spring onions, etc., and carrots I'm going to continuously sow. But I need to make sure that whenever something is harvested and it's pulled out, that I've got something else that can go in its place, either to give me a harvest or to nourish the soil, so like another calendula or a plant of some description. So I'm not leaving bare soil. And the more covered it can be with crops, the more things growing in there, the better. Obviously, you don't want to pack it too tight. You need to have some airflow as well around the plant. That's why I think the square foot method is quite helpful. Yeah, so we've got square foot method, a polyculture, and succession planting. They're the main 3 approaches that I'm using to plant my veg garden this year. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful, and just goes to show really that you can take bits of information from lots of different learnings, and you don't have to follow anything to the letter of the law. There's no right or wrong in gardening. Ultimately, you just want to get it in the ground and start planting and start learning. But I'm just hoping that by showing you that you can plant in this kind of diverse, mixed way with a square foot approach to sort of give you some guide as to spacing, and then just making sure that you're just constantly sowing seedlings each month to keep them as packed as you possibly can. Enjoy.